Hi everybody, Fred the Pirate here, and this is a review of Young Justice Season 2, Episode 18, entitled Intervention, and the summary for this week's episode is the team attempts to free Blue Beetle from the Reach's control and avert Impulse's prophecy. So overall, I thought this week's episode was really nice. It was definitely good to see how the team dealt with saving Blue Beetle, and I was actually kind of surprised that they did this so soon because I figured that they'd kind of wait to save him, like towards like the last moment, but but they ended up saving him earlier, and so basically what happens in this episode is we start with um, Blue Beetle fighting the Toy Man, and he ends up defeating him. And we find out the way that the Reach is controlling Jaime is essentially that Jaime is trapped in his body, and it is the ambassador who is controlling Jaime. And so he makes Jaime move and he makes Jaime speak. So essentially, like, Jaime literally is a puppet to the ambassador. And I guess I kind of just figured that the way the Reach was controlling Jaime was that they had brainwashed him and that he was the one who was in charge of his what he was doing physically, and he was the one who was in charge of his cognitive abilities, or at the very least that it was the scarab that the Reach allowed the scarab to take full control, which is that's how I was assuming that worked. But it was interesting to see how pretty much the Reach just overrode all of Jaime's physical and cognitive abilities and essentially just trapped him in his own body. Like, he's there, and it was interesting having him talk to the scarab and also to the ambassador, and it's like, this is just so ridiculous, and like, why are you making me do this? Like, I wouldn't move like that, I wouldn't talk like that. And so that was really interesting. And and you can't help but kind of feel bad for Jaime because like it just must be so horrible literally be like being trapped in your body because he is perfectly aware of what he's doing, but he can't do anything about it. And so that has to be, super, super horrifying to be in that position of, knowing that your body is doing horrible things, but that you can't stop that. So that was definitely interesting. And so after he defeats the Toy Man, the team essentially on his way home, the team captures him. So he's captured by Impulse and Batgirl and Zatanna and Rocket. And so in the way, and I like how they trapped him. Essentially, Rocket puts a force field around him, and then Zatanna uses her magic to reinforce it with a magical force field. So that was cool. And they end up taking him to some ruins in Bialya, which that in itself was really risky because obviously Bialya is under the control of the tyrant, I believe Queen Bee is her name. And if I heard her name correctly, I might have misheard it. So, but they have to take them to these ruins in Bialya, which are guarded by the tyrant Queen Bee, and so they have to fight her henchmen and these superpowered people that are supposed to be under the control of both the Light and the Reach. But eventually, they defeat them, and then Zatanna. Uh, Essentially, they defeat Jaime because they got him trapped. But then the Green Beetle comes after they defeat all the henchmen, and they end up actually capturing him. And so towards the end of the episode, they end up Zatanna ends up performing a magical ritual to free both Jaime and the Green Beetle from the Reach's control. So that was really interesting. And at the end of the episode, we end up learning about the history of the Blue Beetle, which that was really interesting. So there's been 3 Blue Beetles. So Ray Cord was the second one before Jaime, and then there was another green beetle before him. And so Ray Cord actually didn't use the scarab. Like, he knew about it, but then he figured out that it was like alien technology, and so he ended up not using it. But uh, when he ended up dying, to save it, it was actually being captured by the light, and so I guess it was interesting to figure out how Jaime kind of threw a wrench in both the light and the Reach's plans just by being the Blue Beetle. So that was definitely fun to learn about. And at the beginning of this episode, we see the Black Beetle and Mongol fighting, and eventually Black Beetle and Green Beetle defeat Mongol, and they put them back in stasis. And so that was pretty interesting. Again, I kind of would have wished, I would have liked to see both of them like have a fight because just how powerful the both of them were. But it was kind of interesting hearing the conversations throughout the episode at the beginning with Black Beetle and then with the ambassador and the scientist, because I think throughout this episode, besides obviously saving Jaime, that we kind of start to learn that things aren't so cohesive with the Reach. Like, when we're first introduced to them, and throughout most of the episodes, we get this impression that they're very unified and that they're working to similar goals and that things are cool. But I think in this week's episode, we start figuring out that there are a lot of that things aren't so cool, especially between the Black Beetle and the ambassador, and that there's a lot of conflict between that. And so I think we're starting to figure out, and then obviously with the scientist and the ambassador. So I think like there's problems obviously with the ambassador and I guess his subordinates or his peers, is that in this episode we find out that the Black Beetle thinks the ambassador's too weak, and the scientist thinks the ambassador's making unnecessary decisions that end up like he's being too violent. So the scientist has the opposite issues with the ambassador that Black Beetle does. But I think in this week's episode we definitely find out that the Reach's house is divided, at least with the 3 most important ones. So I think that's definitely not going to bode well for them. So I'm definitely looking forward to, in future episodes, how they deal with that. Honestly, I think we're probably going to deal with that division in the Reach it's going to be even more. And honestly, I think based on what they showed with the Black Beetle, I think he might be planning to defect. Like, it just seems like he's tired of the ambassador. And I know a couple episodes back, he teamed up with the one chick with the mohawk and the skull tattoo on her head, and I forgot what her name is. But, he teamed up with her, and honestly, it doesn't seem like he minds working with the Earth villains. Like, that doesn't seem to be an issue with him. So, honestly, I'm kind of wondering, since the Reach's house is divided, and we know that the light wants to screw over the Reach, and obviously at the end of this week's episode we find out that that's definitely true, because Queen Bee mentions to her henchman, she's like, I'm glad that you threw the fight with the heroes, and I knew that must have been hard for you, but we needed to do that for our plan to go enact. And so that was definitely interesting. But I think with that, and also like I mentioned with the Black Beetle, with him obviously having issues, like maybe he'll defect to the light. I don't know how likely that is, but it might be a possibility. It kind of seemed like they were hinting at the Black Beetle defecting. And possibly, I don't know if the scientist is going to defect, but I definitely know that she has issues with the ambassador. And so I think maybe she might try to throw him under the bus to save their plans. Because honestly, it kind of seems like she's the only one who's interested in their goals. Like, it seems like the ambassador is just interested in power, and he just wants to be powerful, and I think he doesn't really care how that happens. And I think with Black Beetle, it's obvious that he's just interested in kind of just being evil and causing a lot of destruction. And I think it seems like with that, honestly, I think the Black Beetle looking like he might end up going rogue, because he's kind of the one that seems most likely to do it. So it's like that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that works. So either way, I think the ambassador might end up getting screwed over, because obviously we know the heroes want to take him down. We know the Justice League, not the Justice League, we know the Light's planning on screwing him over. And it looks like that we know now, at least it's heavily hinted, that both the Black Beetle and the scientist aren't cool with him. That they both have issues with him. I don't think the scientist will defect, but I think she'll probably try to screw him over. And honestly, I think the Black Beetle might defect. Like, I think that might be something he'll do. With the Light's plan, a couple episodes ago, I was assuming, because I was under the impression that the Reach was the biggest threat in the series, and since it seemed like everybody was so outmatched, that the Light and the League would team up to defeat the Reach. But honestly, I'm assuming that maybe the tag team might go the other way. I think it's obvious that the Lights, I guess given what happened at the end of this episode, I'm wondering if the Light, obviously they're going to screw over the Reach, but they're not cool with the League, so I wonder if they're going to screw over the Reach with something, and then take whatever that something is and turn it on the heroes. And I guess I don't think, maybe they could team up with the heroes, but I think it would be temporary, that they'd use something to take out. So like the heroes and the Light would initially team up to take on the Reach, and then the Light would do something, like they'd use something to take out the Reach, and then when they're teaming up with the heroes, but their team up, I think, would work in a way where they would make sure that the maximum amount of damage that could happen to the heroes could happen to them, and then they'd take out the Reach, and then they'd turn on the heroes at their weakest moment. Like, I think maybe that might be what's going to happen, because that kind of seems likely now. But anyway, I'm glad that Jaime's back, and I'm also kind of glad that they helped the Green Beetle, although I didn't think that they were going to do that, so I was actually surprised, because, again, based on how I thought Jaime had been taken over, that I assumed that the Green Beetle was just evil, and not necessarily that he was in the same position as Jaime. So I didn't assume that they would save him, but it was interesting to learn that he was in the same position that Jaime was, and it will be interesting to see him be a good guy. Although, I guess I wonder what's going to happen with there being Magan and John Jones. So, like, now we got 3 Martians on Earth. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. So I guess I'm interested in seeing what he does and what he becomes. So that'll be interesting. Because I'm not really super familiar with the comic book, so I don't know if there's like a third Martian hero in the I'm pretty sure that the Green Beetle's kind of just his own thing, and that he's just in the TV show. But it'll certainly be interesting to see what they do with him. but I'm definitely looking forward to what happens next week, and I'm kind of interested to see if maybe my theories about stuff are gonna how they're gonna pan out. This week's episode definitely gave me a couple of things to think about in terms of potential things that could happen. So yeah, so overall this was a really good episode this week, and I'm definitely looking forward to next week's episode. So with that said, this has been a review of Young Justice Season 2, Episode 18, entitled Intervention. And I want to make sure you guys tell me what you think about this week's episode, and tell me what your guys' theories are, because I'm definitely interested in hearing them. So make sure you comment, rate, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys again next time. So see ya.